so I think I'm ready. I'm ready if you want. So, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Dear students, faculty, staff, parents, and friends of the college. I am Josh Hagen, Dean of the College of Letters and Science. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Frank and Kathleen Haney Lecture Hall to kick off the 24th Annual College of Letters and Science Undergraduate Research Symposium. I want to thank Chancellor Thomas Gibson and Provost LaVon Cornell Swanson for their support, and special thanks to State Senator Patrick Teston for joining us this afternoon. We are honored that you made time in your busy schedules to be here today. During its 24-year history, nearly 2,000 students have participated in the symposium. This year's symposium features approximately 100 research posters and presentations drawn from across the college. These posters and presentations highlight the curiosity, dedication, and passion of our students to pursue research and intellectual development in close partnership with faculty mentors, as true partners in discovery. In fact, Partners in Discovery was the tagline for the college's recent Giving Challenge as part of UWSP's Day of Giving. Partners in Discovery is a long-term effort to establish and grow a permanent endowment to support and increase student participation in this symposium, and more generally increase opportunities for undergraduate research. I am pleased to report that our initial goal of $10,000 was reached and in fact greatly surpassed. By the end of Tuesday, Partners in Discovery had passed $21,000 for this spring, and I understand more gifts are forthcoming. Combined with approximately $14,000 raised last spring, as well as subsequent giving through last summer and fall, the endowment now totals over $50,000. Thank you to all of you who have helped us build and grow that endowment and foundation for student success. I would like to recognize the efforts of the faculty and staff who helped coordinate and plan this event for the last several months. If they would please stand to be recognized. Thanks are due to David Berry, Lynn Ludwig, Joe Mondlock, Cody Wanta, Kyle Yenter, and Carrie Zolkowski. Thank you so much. And special thanks to Carrie Hutton, who is the leader in coordinating this symposium today. Thank you, Carrie. I would also be remiss if I did not recognize the efforts of our faculty mentors who guided these student projects. The mentors are listed in the program. Would all of the faculty mentors present please stand? They're already standing. Thank you for inspiring our students. Finally, please join me in congratulating our students for all of their hard work to reach this point. Students, this is your day, and we are so proud of your accomplishments. Congratulations. So, to kick off the symposium, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Brian Barringer, Associate Professor and Chair of the Biology Department. He will provide an overview of his work with students and faculty colleagues on the collaborative and multidisciplinary nature of doing science, cannabis as a model study system. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Barringer.
All right, hopefully I didn't turn that off in the process. Thank you, Josh, and thanks to all of you for being here. I should let you know from the outset I don't have any free samples. So if you're here for free samples, you can feel free to take off. You don't need to be embarrassed. I do, though, have some plants that I thought, I know that none of you have ever seen cannabis before, but I thought I would pass a couple of them around, and this is what's referred to as a Colorado cherry wine strain of hemp of cannabis sativa. This is an Oregon strain. It's mostly grown for CBD. Most of them are, frankly, these days, hemp at least. And I just thought it would be fun to kind of, have them pass them around. Feel free to, kind of very gently pinch the buds, if you will, and you can kind of smell your fingers and get a sense of the wonderful smell of cannabis, the terpenes and the other volatiles that they release. And you don't need to be too gentle with the plants. They enjoy being touched and cared for. So anyway, so yeah, I thought I would start out with that. But once again, thank you so much for being here. By the way, I did not know that Senator Teston was going to be here. I don't know where he is, but I'm thrilled that you're here. Senator Teston, along with Katrina Shanklin and others in this state, have really helped make it possible for people like me to study cannabis legally, and we definitely owe a debt of gratitude to you for that. So thanks for being here. So I was really thrilled to be asked by the committee to give today's presentation. I'm really excited about the work that we've been doing these last few years. And it's been a few years now. It started in fall of 2019, basically, for me, and it's more or less exploded in the years since. And so basically what I would like to do today is just kind of tell that story. I'm going to talk a little bit about our research, but I'm along the way going to highlight, as the title suggests, collaboration and our multidisciplinary approach to doing our work. And there are an awful lot of people involved in this work, and so I want to start out by just highlighting them. Before I even talk about the details of our work, I just want to highlight that collaborative and multidisciplinary kind of approach to what we do. And apropos, frankly, to today's symposium, if I can get this to cooperate. There we go. Apropos to today's symposium, for me, this all started with a student. So one of my students, and some of you may remember him, Sean Kim, this pointer is not working, I noticed the other day, but he's in the forefront of that photo there. They're all wearing masks. This photo was taken a couple of years ago. I see Jacqueline and others looking at Madison, who I know they're good friends, but Madison is there also in the forefront on the right. But this all started with me, with Sean Kim, who came to me early in fall of 2019, and he was taking my upper division course in plant ecology. It's a lecture lab course. And as part of taking that course, I have my students conceive of and design and execute their own experiment. And it can really be anything as long as it's related to plant ecology in one way or another. And Sean came to me and he kind of whispered and he said, he goes, "Can I grow cannabis in the greenhouse?" And I said, "Well, I don't think so. But I'll look into it." And he explained his reasoning, that the Farm Bill had just passed and that actually, as long as you have the right licenses and all of that, you can absolutely do that. And so I told him, I said, "Well, it sounds intriguing. I have to admit it's a provocative study system. So I'll look into it." And I ended up jumping through the hoops, and there are quite a few of them. You have to get fingerprinted and then send those off to the FBI, and they have to, confirm that you're not a drug lord and all that sort of stuff. But eventually I ended up with a license to grow and conduct research on cannabis, and away we went. And so I just wanted to highlight Sean Kim right from the get-go, because he was just one of our amazing students. And he's actually now, this photo was taken down at UW-Madison. He's doing a graduate degree with one of our main collaborators, Dr. Shelby Ellison, down at UW-Madison. He's just about done, actually, with his grad degree now. All right, but there are lots and lots of other people involved in this work. I'm the guy standing up here talking to you about this stuff, but none of this would be possible without just an army of people in the background. One of them is Dr. Shannon Rhea up there, kind of the second to the right there, in what is definitely not a staged photo. She is pointing out to one of our students, now graduated, Barbara, apparently how to use the HPLC, and again, I'm sure that's not a staged photo. Third to the right there is Dr. Ann Impoletti. She's our plant physiologist. That's definitely not a staged photo. She was out in the field with me last summer. We were down at a research station in Arlington that's owned by UW-Madison doing some work. and she's getting the LICOR instrument set up and ready to measure photosynthesis on a bunch of plants. I'll show you some photos of that here in just a little bit. All the way to the right on the top is Bryant Scherenbrock in soil science and CNR. It turns out that soil is really important for growing plants, including cannabis, and nobody knows more about soil than Bryant Scherenbrock, and nobody is more passionate about soil. Is that you? Yeah, there you are. Nobody is more passionate about soil than Bryant Scherenbrock, and so he's really been integral to this, and we're actually using some of his property as one of our field sites. So I wanted to highlight those three individuals here at UWSP in particular, because everything I have done, they have done with me, and again, I'm just the guy up here talking. More recently, Laura Cole has come on board a little bit to help supervise some of the students, in particular in chemistry, who are doing some of the chemical analyses of our plants, and we really appreciate that, and we hope that she continues with us. I've got Joe Mondlock and Paul Whitaker up there because we're hoping that they too are going to come on board, and we've talked with them about ways that they can contribute to our work. I'll talk about this in just a moment, but we've been involved in some research that's focused on what's called phytoremediation. And as many of you probably know, PFAS are just a hot topic in the news and so on and so forth. And so we've talked a little bit about maybe using cannabis to address kind of the PFAS issue in soils and water. And so again, I'll mention that here in a little bit. And Paul Whitaker is among many other things an entomologist and has done a lot of really cool work in the past in agricultural systems. And so we've talked with him about coming on board as well. Most importantly, though, is that last photo on the bottom right, and that's the students. And I really want to highlight how important they have been. None of this stuff would be happening if it wasn't for our students. And a lot of them are here today, and I'm grateful for that. I'm actually going to invite them up here at the end of the talk real quick. But just from the outset, I want to highlight how important their contributions have been. None of this would be happening without them. I also just want to introduce you to a couple of our collaborators elsewhere. So this is Dr. Shelby Ellison on the left. She's at UW-Madison. She runs a cannabis research group down there. She's a plant geneticist. And this is Phil Scott on the right. He's the president and founder of the Hemp Farmers and Manufacturers Association. Nothing related to hemp happens in this state without him knowing about it. He really does have his finger on everything related to cannabis. And he's been a great source of information and just a general resource for us over the last few years. So I wanted to recognize him as well. All right, so what I'm going to do, and I'm going to have to do it pretty quickly here, is kind of go through some of the basics of, what we've been up to and why we've been up to the things that we've been up to and where we see this stuff going in the future. So I'm going to talk about what cannabis is. I'm going to give you a very brief history of cannabis cultivation and use. I'm going to talk very briefly about why we study cannabis. I think the reasons are pretty obvious. It's cool. We're cool because we study cannabis. But there are lots of other more practical reasons for it. We're going to talk very, very briefly about our research, and you can learn more about that today at the symposium. And then I'm going to end with something that we're really, really excited about, and that's the future of cannabis science here at UWSP. And so here we go. So first of all, what is cannabis? I find there's a lot of misinformation out there, bear with me if you're not botanically inclined and don't think about this stuff much. Cannabis, first of all, that's the name of a genus. I tend to just sort of use it in a very non-generic way, but it is the name of a genus, okay, in the flowering plant family, the Cannabaceae. It's a pretty small family, okay, and when we refer to cannabis, we can refer to it as hemp, we can refer to it as marijuana, and as I'm going to make clear, I hope to you, the only difference between those two things is the amount of THC, which is the main psychoactive cannabinoid that cannabis produces or doesn't produce for the most part in the case of hemp. That's the only difference between the two, and I want to make that clear right from the outset, and I'll point that out again here in just a moment. So it's a pretty small family, first of all. It's also a really small genus. Depending on who you talk to, there are about 3 species in the genus. I say about because, again, some people would claim there are maybe 5. Others would say, nah, it's all just the same species and just variation within that species. I think most people would say there are 3. The family itself is also relatively small, at least, relative to plant families in general, about 170 species total. grouped into 11 genera, including cannabis itself, hops, which of course is probably pretty well known to most of you, at least indirectly, and celtis, hackberries. Celtis is by far within the family the largest genus, about 100 species, give or take. On the other hand, cannabis and hops are certainly the most economically important, although they're pretty small. Interestingly, Cannabaceae, the family Cannabaceae, are often dioecious, okay? So what that means, that's just a fancy word that means separate male and female individuals, which might not sound all that exotic to you, but in the plant world, that's actually pretty rare. So again, depending on who you talk to and depending on the study, maybe 10%-ish of flowering plants are dioecious. And even when it comes to cannabis, it turns out that's not a hard, fast rule, and there's some variation around that as well. But generally speaking, they're dioecious, and they're primarily wind pollinated. And that's really important, by the way, because when you're growing cannabis, generally, not always, but generally you're interested in the females and the flower material the females are producing. And for a variety of reasons that I don't have time to go into, generally you don't want those females to be pollinated. And because they're wind pollinated, you know, the pollen moves around pretty easily on its own, even in the greenhouse. And so when we grow plants in the greenhouse, we have to sequester the males from the females unless we want our buds, if you will, full of seed. And there are a variety of reasons why we generally don't want that to be the case. They produce copious amounts of pollen. These are all males. This little video that I'm going to show you was taken in the greenhouse on the rooftop of the TNR building. And so hopefully this will work. And you'll see, I'm just going to shake a couple of the plants, and you'll see the pollen grains just fly off these plants like dust. You kind of see that yellowish mist. You'll see it again here, and as the camera pans down, you'll see it, I think, even more profoundly as it settles down. Yeah, there toward the end. So, you know, a male plant can produce an awful lot of pollen. And again, if you're not interested in producing seed, and there are other reasons, by the way, why you might not want your female flowers to be pollinated, you really need to sequester your males from your females. And so that's generally what we do. Although some of our work is focused, we have what are called feminized lines, so they don't actually produce males. It's all females, and that makes things pretty convenient. But for the most part, you have to worry about those males. One of the interesting things about working with cannabis, and it sounds like a good problem to have, but it really can be a problem, is that there's so much information out there. I mean, there's no doubt that cannabis is hugely economically important, socially important, and has been for millennia. And so there's an awful lot of information out there, but the problem is a lot of it is anecdotal at best, and some of it is just plain false. Interestingly enough, one of my primary sources of information for just kind of learning how to grow cannabis is High Times magazine, right? Far from a peer-reviewed, journal. But the fact is, some of our best horticulturalists and gardeners have been growing cannabis in their basements and their garages for years, and they're really, really good at it, right? And they write articles, and they publish it in High Times magazine. By the way, our library now has a subscription to that. You can thank me for that. They couldn't get a digital subscription for whatever reason, but they do have a hard copy. At sort of the other end of the scale, what's interesting is I find that even sources of information that you might think you can trust, like this Basic Cannabis Knowledge 101 pamphlet that apparently was put out from by the Montana State Department of Public Health and Human Services, has mistakes in it. And so you can see that I see this a lot, by the way. This is kind of something that people, for whatever reason, seem to think. You can see, and it may be hard to read from where you're sitting, but it says down at the bottom, hemp is produced from the male cannabis plant. Nope. That's not true. I hear that a lot. People seem to think that male cannabis is hemp and female cannabis is marijuana, but that's not true. They're exactly the same species. Everything about them is the same other than the THC content. So let me just kind of make that clear once again, okay? Hemp and marijuana are the same species. Cannabis sativa for the most part. Again, there are potentially a handful of other species in the genus, and I don't really have time to go into those details now, but generally speaking, we're talking about Cannabis sativa. We study hemp, okay, here at the university and in the state, not marijuana, for now, and I really hope that that changes. It's changing all around us, right? Marijuana, recreational marijuana is legal all around us. In fact, just hot off the press, it looks like Minnesota is going to become recreationally legal in Minnesota. It's already legal in Michigan and Illinois. It's medically legal in Iowa. So for now, we hope that that changes. Hemp, by definition, as I said earlier, has very low levels. Again, legally by definition, 0.3% or less of the main psychoactive compound, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, delta-9 THC, and that's it. That's the difference between marijuana and hemp, okay? Both hemp and marijuana can have high levels of cannabidiol, CBD, which I'm guessing many of us have at least heard of, and a whole slew of other cannabinoids. There have been something like 160 different cannabinoids that have been isolated now from cannabis. There's a whole bunch of them. Hemp is legal to grow and process with the right license here in Wisconsin. Marijuana is not. Okay, and again, I'm hoping that that changes because I think that'll open the world for lots of interesting things once we can actually work with high THC cannabis. One of the reasons that I love cannabis in terms of a study system, if you will, is that it's good at just about everything. And I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but the fact is, it is really amazing what people have figured out, to do with this plant over the years. Part of that is due to its morphology and its anatomy and so on. Much of it, of course, is to do with its phytochemistry. It certainly has one of the strongest natural fibers in the world, really good for making things like rope, for example, and other textiles. And then obviously, I think, probably to all of us, it has a lot of medical and recreational significance as well. And so there's just a world of questions that you can ask about this species. And I'll just highlight again that you would think, given how important cannabis is to humans and has been, as I'll point out here, for about 11,000 years, we think, you would think that every question would have been asked. And the fact is, I'll bet most of them have, but people growing cannabis, someplace in the middle of California in 1980 in their basement are not publishing in the American Journal of Botany, right? And so it means that people like me and my collaborators, even some of the most basic science that we do with this species is interesting and worth publishing, and that's really a really exciting place to be. So I just hinted at this, a brief history of cannabis cultivation and use. It's absolutely one of the world's oldest cultivated plants. It's native to Central and or Southern Asia, but it's enjoyed, and I use that word on purpose, from the plant's perspective, it's enjoyed worldwide domination because of its interactions with humans, and it's now found everywhere, all over the world, because of its relationship with us. The earliest unambiguous written account of humans using cannabis comes from Emperor Shen Nung's Pharmacopoeia in about 2800 BCE. So what is that, about 5,000 years ago, give or take? But archaeological evidence suggests that we've been using it for a lot longer than that, maybe as early as 8800 BCE and even earlier than that, potentially. So our relationship with cannabis runs deep. There's no doubt about that. We've been interacting with this plant for an awful long time. Here in the United States, this comes as a surprise to a lot of people, especially people here in Wisconsin, maybe who have never thought about this. At one time, the state of Wisconsin was one of the nation's leading producers of hemp-based fiber. It was widely grown in our state. You don't have to go back very far, as a matter of fact, before that was true. Through much of the first half of the 20th century, that was true. It was a wartime crop. You've probably heard of a victory garden, those of you who are old enough to have heard that phrase, a victory garden. Well, you probably never thought about a victory garden having cannabis in it, right? But you can find lots of wartime, particularly World War I, propaganda, essentially, trying to convince American farmers to grow this plant because, among other things, the fiber is just so damn strong, and you can make amazing rope with it and other textiles. And so it was in real high demand here in Wisconsin, and and elsewhere. As a matter of fact, one of our nation's largest processing companies was right here in Wisconsin, the Fairwater Hemp Company. It went out of business in 1931, but they were one of the leading hemp processors for many years. There have been a lot of processors in our state. And then essentially what happened is growing taboos against cannabis, driven largely, I would argue, by racist ideals, by anti-immigration policies that were kind of coming into play in a post-prohibition era, led to what's called the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937. It was still legal to grow at that time, but it was becoming increasingly expensive for farmers to grow it. They were being taxed out of business, basically, is what was happening. And so increased taxes were forcing people out of business. It was still legal to grow for quite some time, all the way up to 1970, and that's when the Controlled Substances Act was passed. And at that point, it was included with heroin, LSD, and many others as a Schedule I drug, which is frankly preposterous. I mean, I think this is still the case, that just to put that in perspective, cocaine and methamphetamine are Schedule II, which is, in other words, a drug that's considered not as bad as cannabis, which I think a lot of us just find pretty ridiculous. So anyway, as of 1970, that was it, right? It became illegal to grow cannabis in any form, to study cannabis. There were a couple of caveats to that, but generally speaking, that was the end of legal cannabis here in the United States until just recently. Okay, so I hear some giggles, so hopefully some of you in the audience at least know who these guys are. I think, are they both still alive? I don't know. Cheech and Chong? Okay, Max says yes. I'll take Max's word for it. So why do we study cannabis? Well, I joked earlier, but the fact is, it is kind of a cool study organism. It's just cool to be involved in a study system that's interesting in that way, and it's interesting to others. And I think that's what gets me the most excited, as I've seen, and I'll show you some data about this in a minute. Since I started studying cannabis, I've seen students just come out of the woodwork wanting to get involved. And you know what? That's great. Honestly, that's great. If I can use this study system to get students excited about science, get them involved in plant biology and ecology and all that stuff, then that's a win-win as far as I'm concerned. So no complaints there. But not to mention that it really is, from a botanical perspective, an ecological perspective, an evolutionary biology perspective, sociocultural perspective, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's just an interesting study system. So speaking of that, I'm going to talk very, very briefly about some of our research, and you can learn more about this. We've got a couple of different student groups presenting research on this here at the symposium. One of the things I like to ask people is imagine, think about all the corn being grown in our state right now. Imagine if corn farmers stopped growing corn tomorrow. And you'd come back in 50 years and you'd find corn all over the damn place, right? Surely there's so much corn in our state that you would find feral corn all over the place. Well, that's exactly what we find when it comes to cannabis. There is feral hemp. A lot of you probably have heard the phrase ditchweed. It's often called ditchweed. There's feral hemp all over our state, and in fact all over the Midwest, and we study that. We study a variety of different processes and patterns related to feral hemp. That photo actually in the upper right is a small feral population that I found really close to here, down Highway 54, just southeast of Plover, not too far away, that we collected from. It's on a farmer's property, and with permission we collected from those plants. But we're asking a number of questions about feral hemp. How common and widespread is it in the state? It turns out very common, very widespread. In what ways, morphologically, physiologically, and otherwise, does it differ from modern day hemp? Has feral hemp evolved resistance to the European hemp borer, which, much like the corn borer, which I'm guessing many of you have heard of, wreaks havoc on hemp? And if so, can we develop a selective breeding program to confer resistance to modern day hemp? So those are just some of the questions that we're addressing. And again, I have to move through this quickly. This is just a map on the left of the state of Wisconsin. The green dots are feral populations that we've identified. The brown dots I'm not going to get into, but those are historic hemp mill sites. And then on the right is a broader view of the Midwest. All the green dots are where we have documented feral hemp populations. So it's really common, and I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg, right? Those are just the ones that we know about. So last summer, we grew up 23 of these populations. Now think about this. These are populations that have been growing wild for conservatively 70 years in most cases, in some cases probably even longer, subject to natural selection, etc. We brought 23 of these populations in, germinate them. This is our amazing student Mary there taking care of our seedlings in the greenhouse. She's really good at taking care of plants, so there are the plants at the adult stage. This is, again, in the TNR greenhouse. We planted these guys out in the field. This is Bryant Sharonbrock's property. We're getting ready to plant all, or in the process of planting them all there last summer. This is another field site we had down in Arlington. It's owned by UW-Madison. This is a little bit, that same field site a little bit later. The plants down there are just gigantic. I mean, just amazing how large they get under the right conditions. And again, I'm just barely introducing this stuff. I don't have time to get into the details. Our students presented some very preliminary data on our feral hemp work last year at this time, and we've got another amazing group of students doing the same thing to kind of update things this time. So you can spend some time with their poster once we're done here. Another major dimension of our work has to do with phytoremediation, so using plants to remediate soil or water, that is, remove pollutants from soil or water. Can hemp be used as an effective phytoremediator? The short answer is yes. Can hemp farmers clean up their environment while generating a profit? Well, we don't know yet. We're trying to figure that out. Where do the pollutants end up in the plant, for example? Can you still use those tissues as a cash crop? And we don't know yet, but we're trying to figure that out. We did do some really cool work a couple of years ago. These were some plants we grew, again, up in the greenhouse, exposing them to different levels of lead and arsenic, which are both very common pollutants in Wisconsin soil. We grew those plants up and in different levels of these pollutants, and then gathered all kinds of data on different traits, including phytochemical traits. Our students presented this work actually not only here, but at the research in the Rotunda, I guess, year before last, which was a lot of fun. There's Mike, our amazing student Mike. I think that's Sue Conley. I don't know if Patrick Teston is in here and can confirm that, but I think, am I right? Yeah, it looks like her. Thank you. Anyway, so that's Mike Dasling's Representative Sue Conley with his amazing knowledge about cannabis. You can tell she's really interested. In fact, it caught the attention of the local media. And so myself and one of our students, Sophia, were both, you hit the big time when you're on the Wausau Channel 7 and Channel 9 News. And so, well, they were intrigued. You can use this crop, this provocative species, to clean up the environment and generate money at the same time, right? So that caught people's attention. So that was a lot of fun. Other projects, well, all kinds of things that I don't have time to go into. This is one of our students, Brian, who told me he couldn't be here today, so I don't think he's in the room. But I love these couple of photos I took of him because he just looks like a proud father. He's been, well, and I should tell you, those plants are about 10 times that large now. I mean, they're huge. They're 4 feet tall. That photo was taken just a few weeks ago. I'm going to sort of pass over that, but this is just kind of a list of a bunch of other things that we're involved in. The future of cannabis here at UWSP, and I'm going to have to make this really quick. Absolutely, it's a provocative study system, and I know that that's a bit of a subjective statement, but I have data that bear that out. Our labs have exploded. Okay, I hate to say that in a room full of chemists, but our labs have exploded in terms of student research over the last few years. In fact, I actually made a little fancy Excel graph showing that. You can see when I started studying cannabis in 2019, and just my lab has steadily increased. I've got crazy to think about 17 students in my lab right now doing independent research projects, and most of them in one way or another are working on cannabis. Last fall, I designed and taught an 8-week special topics course focused on cannabis. I capped it at 18 students. It filled in less than 24 hours. In the middle of the summer, I advertised it. When students aren't even checking their email, it filled in 24 hours. I ended up with 33 students. I don't like to say no. So I ended up with 33 students representing 13 majors from 3 colleges here at the university. It was a lot of fun to teach that class. The bottom line is students are really interested in this stuff and they want to get involved. And I don't blame them. The industry is exploding. We've had 5 years in a row of greater than 27% job growth, okay? Over 428,000 just in the legal industry, and that's an important point. Just the legal industry, which estimates are that represents about 25% of the industry, okay? So 75% of the industry is still illicit, okay? So just the legal industry, it's just exploded. If you want to talk money, $25 billion, these are data from 20 and 21, $25 billion roughly is how much American consumers are spending on cannabis legally. And again, that's estimated to be about 25% of the market. So you do the math, we're right on par with something like beer, maybe even surpassing beer in terms of the amount of money the American consumer is spending on cannabis. This figure on the right is just the exploding job market in some of our neighbors, places like Michigan and Illinois. I guarantee Minnesota is going to be on that list next year. They're going to explode once recreational cannabis happens, and I am really hoping that we stop missing out on this as a state and legalize recreational cannabis for that reason. We're missing out. Last but not least, and I'm sorry, I know I'm over time here, but I promise this is the end. So we, myself, Dr. Annan Paletti, Dr. Ria, are currently developing a brand new team-taught course focused on cannabis science that we're going to offer this fall. It's going to be targeted towards juniors and seniors. It's going to include both lecture and lab components. But that's really just the prelude to a new graduate level cannabis science program that we're developing. Okay, it'll be 9 credits probably. Some of this is still being worked out. It'll be 9 credits at the graduate level, housed within our school, the School of Biology, Chemistry, and Biochemistry. It's going to be offered, as I said, at the graduate level in both online and in-person components, a mixture of those two. And the goal is to accept our first cohort of students next fall of 2024. So we're working pretty hard on that. And then finally, and bear with me, first I want to thank you guys for being here. I want to encourage you to have a fantastic time at the symposium, and not to presume that you're going to clap, but before you do that, I'd like to invite, if you'll humor me, all of our collaborators and students that are involved in this work. Could you come up here and just join me real quick? I think it'll be a nice kind of visual display of how many people are involved in this stuff. Oh, it doesn't matter, yeah. So you guys can see, I mean, I just wanted to do this as cheesy as it is, because I think that it underscores the impact of this study system. You know, I mean, who would have guessed, if you had asked me 5 years ago, or if you had told me 5 years ago that I was going to be up here with a group of people like this talking about our work on cannabis, I would have told you you must be high, right? So, you know, seriously, I mean, it really is quite remarkable. And I just want to emphasize once again that I'm the guy up here talking, but these are the people that are doing the work, and I'm definitely not doing it alone. So thank you all.